Hello. Let's see if we can open this. Welcome to 4 Random Books, episode 22. And this is sort of not so much 4 random books as I had 4 books sitting together on the shelf and they looked like a rather nice set. So random, but I'd put them together on the shelf and probably used them together before, so how random is that? I don't know. And I'm going to leave the oldest to last. Commonwealth Cruisers, 1939 to 1945. 3 of these books are the Osprey New Vanguard series. 3 of them are actually by Angus Konstam, who is always a great guy. Illustrated 2 by Paul Wright and 1 by Tony Bryan. I love these books. They have beautiful pictures in them. They have beautiful content. They always have these lovely extra drawings. They're usually not that expensive, and they're usually a great place to start. In 1941, the decision was made to make the New Zealand Division a fleet in its own right, rather than an adjunct of the Royal Navy. Consequently, on the 1st of October 1941, the Royal New Zealand Navy was created by royal decree. The division's ships then in service, including Achilles and Leander, duly changed their prefix from HMS to HMNZS. So almost 3 decades after Canada and Australia, a 3rd Dominion fleet came into being. As the war progressed, the Royal New Zealand Navy expanded as its ships operated in support of the Royal Navy and other allied forces in the Atlantic, the Indian Ocean, the Mediterranean, and the South Pacific. Achilles took part in the Battle of the River Plate before sailing home to hunt German raiders in the Pacific. Leander served in the Pacific during the first years of the war, but between 1941 and 43 she operated as part of the British Mediterranean Fleet. New Zealand warships also became part of the Anzac Squadron, the Southwest Pacific Command, and would serve in both the US 7th Fleet and the British Pacific Fleet. 2 Leander-class light cruisers were eventually reinforced. In January 1943, Achilles was badly damaged while taking part in fighting in the South Pacific. Consequently, in September, the Royal Navy lent the Fiji-class light cruiser Gambia to the RNZN to act as a replacement. Finally, the 2 Dido-class light cruisers Bellona and Black Prince were also earmarked for transfer from the Royal Navy to the Royal New Zealand Navy. But they were not commissioned into New Zealand service until after the war. At the same time, in 1946, Achilles was transferred from the RNZN to the Royal Indian Navy. There's so much content in these ones. And they're really nicely pictured. British Light Cruisers, 1939 to 1945. I do love me a C-Class. The design of the D-Class cruisers was similar to the Carlisle class, but the hulls were lengthened to accommodate the additional gun mounting. So these vessels had 2 6-inch guns forward, 2 amidships, and 2 in the stern. Torpedoes, a dozen in 4 treble launchers, were also carried amidships. 2 launchers on each beam. Lessons learnt from Jutland led to the addition of deck protection over the magazines and the better gun shields. The last 2 D-class cruisers, Dispatch and Diomede, had a more pronounced shear on the bow than their sisters, in line with the rake bow of the Carlisle class. These vessels only received only minimal modifications. During the war, Dana and Dele had their torpedo tubes removed and all received additional small AA guns and radar, including Dunedin, which was torpedoed and sunk off the coast of Brazil before any major changes to armament could be made. The biggest modification was made to Delhi during a refitting in the United States in 1941. Her main battery was replaced by 5 US-built 5-inch guns, complete with their attendant Mark 37 fire control directors and fire control radar. For the most part, these D-class cruisers were deployed away from the main theatres, and so never benefited from the regular upgrades available to warships operating in the home Mediterranean fleets. The D-Class are a great example of ships which were built just at the slightly wrong time. If they had been built slightly later, they would have probably been updated because it would have been their time for refit. If they'd been built slightly earlier, they'd have been updated and probably far more useful in World War II than they were in terms of being able to be used as a frontline asset. They did, to an extent, serve on frontline roles, especially at the beginning of World War II, but they spent much of the war in what would be called secondary theatres. Because just because you're in the middle of a world war and your nation is fighting for its existence doesn't mean you can afford to abandon whole sections of the world's oceans that you have maintained a presence in for centuries. You abandon them, you leave them for the other side to start causing mischief in them. You can't afford to do that. That was the D-Class Cruisers role. British destroyers, 1939 to 1945. The pre-war classes. You can all tell why I have this book. Some beautiful drawings in here. Absolutely gorgeous. Absolutely gorgeous. I am a sucker for a lovely drawing and a good map. I know this. And I live with this. It's also well written. Their capabilities and even their appearance did not change much during most of this period, and this tendency towards standardization meant that each class was an evolutionary refinement of a previous design. However, by the mid-1930s it had become clear that Britain had lost its edge in its design. Its foreign rivals, most notably the Germans and Italians, were building larger, more powerful destroyers which were better armed, although their added top hamper degraded their seakeeping qualities. How the British continued to favour medium destroyers, as for political reasons cost and quantity were more important than firepower or quality. I'd also argue for strategic reasons. The Royal Navy was seeking to get the largest amount it could out of its treaty allowance, and it needed to be the largest amount possible of viable hulls. So you can't go building tiny destroyers because they're going to be no help. But if you can get a dozen decent destroyers for the tonnage cost of 8 exceptional destroyers, then a nation which is looking at fighting perhaps an Atlantic war, perhaps supporting a war in the Far East, whilst also having to maintain significant presence in the Mediterranean and the Atlantic, or in its worst case scenario, fighting a global war against enemies in the Pacific, the Mediterranean, and the Atlantic, then in the nicest way, there is a certain strategic thought, an idea that goes through your head when it comes to going, well, do I build an equivalent capability but have less ships, risk parity in numbers, and risk the fact that because I'm overstretched and having to keep my ships operating all the time to cover because I don't know when the enemy's going to strike, and the enemy might actually locally be able to overwhelm me in terms of numbers, or whether I build slightly less capable but more numerous vessels that enable me to guarantee equivalency of numbers, which combined with training, tactical elan, and some luck might just allow me to make sure that they never have superiority numbers over me. To be fair, I would say after the experiences of Norway and in the Mediterranean, and to an extent some experience in the Pacific. The Royal Navy didn't make the wrong choice. This is a bit more special though, and a little bit more difficult to get hold of. It's a Warships Illustrated, number 4, British Destroyers in World War II by R.A.Burt. It's published by Arms and Armour Press in 1985. And it is gorgeous. It is full of beautiful pictures. It is full of beautiful content. It is what I would call a picture book for historians in many respects, because it is all about its pictures. That is what leads it. That is what it contains. You know, for example, here. Designed as a reply to large Italian scout destroyers commissioned in 1928 and 1929 and to German boats laid down in 1934-5, to which British contemporaries were obviously inferior, the Treble class combined offensive power, speed, and seakeeping qualities to an extent never before equalled in British destroyers. They are designed mainly for breaking up enemy flotillas by gun action, this aspect of the armament being emphasized at the expense of a number of torpedo tubes. That is certainly one policy on why the tribals were built. I'm not sure I agree with it, but it's a nice idea. It also is kind of interesting that the Royal Navy designed something in response to it. They're building destroyers every year, but they wait about most of a decade before designing a response to the Italian scout destroyers. Actually, they don't. The response to the Italian scout destroyers was the Arefusa class. Arguably, their job was, there are big destroyers. We will have a little cruiser. You will beat them up. Good. We are building big destroyers because we need more cruisers. For other cruiser roles, other than beating up big destroyers, although our big destroyers shall also be able to beat up the enemy big destroyers. The first group of tribals was ordered in March 1936 and completed in 1938-9. The second group was ordered in June 1936 and completed around the same period as the first group. The class comprised a total of 16 destroyers, Afidi, Somali, Cossack and Tartar being fitted as leaders, although they was not classed as such. In fact, the whole of the force were able to operate as leaders. There is no such thing as 4 being fitted for and the rest not being, because they were all designed with the space to be a destroyer leader, because that's part of the function of being a larger destroyer. You can be a destroyer leader, and is of course what they were technically defined as during the destroyers. But also Afridi, Somali, Cossack and Tartar, missing out one. The pictures are glorious. Bedouin took part in the Second Battle of Narvik in April 1914, was lucky not to have survived a torpedo attack by U-25, but didn't lose her bow like Eskimo did, so yeah. Later, while serving in the Mediterranean fleet and escorting a Malta convoy, she was attacked and towed by Italian cruisers. She was taken in tow by Partridge, but the tow had to be abandoned owing to the presence of enemy warships. Left to her fate, she was later attacked by enemy aircraft and hit by a torpedo. She sank on the 15th of June 1942 and sank the aircraft, shot down the aircraft which sunk her. Well, she wasn't going to go down without a fight. She was a tribal class destroyer. Gorgeous books these were. Lovely ships. And I'm going to call this illustration books. Thank you. Thank you as ever to all the watchers, to all the subscribers. Please do. There is a little bell down there as well next to the subscribe button that tells you when I have these go live. And thank you very much to my patrons. They make everything possible. Thank you. Well, you all do, frankly. Make all this possible. Thank you.